Hello and welcome to Chat GCP, a medical science, clinical research and commercialization podcast, and I'm your host, Charles Beasley. On today's episode, we have Kieran Jina. Kieran is a venture capitalist at Pacific Channel Venture Capital. Great to have you on the podcast today, Kieran.
Great to be here, Charles.
I'm really looking forward to this discussion because everyone likes talking about, how we get technologies from idea to market. And that requires a lot of money or a lot of capital. And, there's many different sources of capital that founders or entrepreneurs can rely on. And, of course, venture capital is one of them. A very powerful one and has been in the news lately with some crazy decisions that have been happening globally, particularly out the US's way. We'll get to that in due course. But I wanted to ask, how did you make your start in venture capital? It's not an obvious career progression, straight out of uni to get into this line of work. So how did you get there?
Well, like most people, by accident, actually. So I ended up in a startup company towards the end of my second master's. And, I loved it. But I also really liked what the company was doing, and I happened to be living with my parents, so I had to move back to Wellington for that job, and so I wasn't spending anything. I was saving a bit of money, and I liked the company enough that I asked the CEO, "Can I invest?" Eventually, the answer was yes, and so I went and emptied all my savings, convinced my parents and brother and sister, and some of my cousins and uncles to also invest, and it was great. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing actually, but I caught the bug. Eventually, that company went on to IPO for a great return. I didn't know that at that point, but I caught the bug.
Right.
I actually then made two further investments into other companies, and through that I got to meet someone who ran a venture capital fund, and then eventually asked them for a job.
Fantastic. So you kind of did like venture capital light, beginner entry level investing in these companies, and now you're doing the real thing.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Is there much in the way of venture capital happening in New Zealand? I think when we go venture capital, it's like obviously Silicon Valley and maybe on the East Coast as well, New York, maybe a bit out of Boston. What about New Zealand? How much is happening here?
Actually, quite a lot. There's a number of funds, and especially a lot of funds that are able to invest early, which I think is a real competitive advantage for New Zealand. Where we struggle is when those companies are successful in their milestones and need a scale. We just don't have that scale in New Zealand. That's why you need to move offshore.
Right. Do you mean the scale as an access to additional capital to support that, or the expertise, the human capital?
I think all of those things.
Right.
So, I mean, the first thing was about venture capital. People think we provide money, and yes, we do. But actually, it's a whole lot more than that. It's connections, it's expertise, the people to sit on boards of directors. To really, a company is not built by one person or even a team of people. It's built by a team of people and then a wider network in the ecosystem. Yep. And as these companies are successful, the expertise and the capital to scale is just not there.
I see, yeah. It's a bit of a shame, isn't it? I mean, because we've got a lot of really bright people doing some really amazing things, and kind of what I'm getting from what you're saying is you can take them to almost like a certain point, and then you have to start looking elsewhere or going elsewhere. Yeah.
I mean, but the positive of that is we're exporting companies to the world.
True. All right. Well, when you take a step back, you kind of alluded that it's not just about money. It's money, connections, board seats, that kind of thing. But in the grand pantheon of different funding or different investment alternatives, where does venture capital sit? So I suppose we've got like private equity, personal loans at the other end, borrowing from mum and dad, that kind of thing, angel investment. So there's a bit of a spectrum, right?
Yeah. So I think at sort of the earliest stage, if you've got an idea that's scalable as a real startup, rather than just you want to build a shop or have a lifestyle business, the starting point is usually friends and family. Officially, it's called 3Fs. I won't explain what the last F is. Then it's angel investors, and then it's venture capital. And venture capital actually is actually a spectrum. So people sort of think it's one entire thing, but there's pre-seed, seed investors, Series A, Series B, and right. so on. different stages, but there's also different types of investors. So investors that prefer to invest in software as a service, investors that invest in deep tech, and then right down to the specialist pharmaceutical investors, and they've all got their own niche. And then right at the end, where something's like more of a stable business and the risk is taken out, that's where you have private equity, public markets. Yeah.
Right. So it's a bit kind of predicated around the risk and the risk appetite, the risk tolerance. Venture capitalists have a bit more
Yeah, I think so.
appetite for risk.
So I think one of the weird things about New Zealand and deep tech is actually venture capital often invests prior to angel. And because the challenge with deep tech is you've really got to understand the technology. And that's something that the venture capital firms that specialize in that have the capability to do, and the angels would rather follow them rather than lead those rounds.
Because there's a lot of due diligence, I imagine, with... So deep tech, definition of that is things that are going to make an impact in the future. Not sure what that's going to look like, but there's a potential there. So it's a long time horizon we're talking. Right, for deep tech?
Yeah, exactly. And so you generally know that the market is there, but the challenge is that building the technology to address that market. That's the real risk. It's that technical building of that product, and that's really what we, after understanding all the business fundamentals, look to de-risk and invest into.
Yeah, so heck of a lot of due diligence that maybe angel investors aren't really set up for, but a venture capital firm interested in this part of the industry does have the expertise and experience doing so.
And when investors without that expertise lead those rounds, that's when you can run into problems like we've seen in the US with a few high-profile companies that perhaps shouldn't have been funded.
Sure. Theranos, perhaps?
Yeah, that's one of those. People talk about it being a scandal of the VC industry, and the VC industry rightly says, well, we never put a cent into it.
Oh, is that right?
No.
Oh, I mean, you just kind of assume that, yeah.
High net worths,
Right.
Corporates partnering.
Yeah. Strange people on the board putting money in to get seats on the board.
Yes. So no real biotech diagnostics expertise behind the money that went in.
Just a flashy smile and a deep voice. But I suppose the other end of the spectrum, not affiliated necessarily with biotech or at all, is the FTX scenario that went down as well, where there was all these different firms just throwing money in. It was almost like a fear of missing out scenario, wasn't it? No real understanding of the product.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two sort of things there, or three things. Is firstly, when there's lots of money in the system, people have a real fear of missing out. But most investors actually focus not on the technology; they really focus on the vision, and then look: do we believe this person has the drive to make that vision a reality? What they're not necessarily looking at is, do they have the right bit of technology to achieve that? Because their view is, the right person will magic something out of nothing. But sometimes, if you want to cure cancer, you can't magic something out of nothing. No. In software, yes, a real good team can create something out of nothing. But I think in many of these cases, Theranos and FTX, even worse, it's just straight fraud. It's and if you're doing that high level diligence, you're not really going to pick that up. And so good diligence is valuable for deep tech to really understand the technology, but good diligence for generalist companies just to really understand, are their promises real?
Yes. Yeah. And then I imagine on top of the due diligence, there's a bit of trust that goes into it as well. I mean, even though you do very, very nitty gritty due diligence, you're not going to see it all. So you need to rely on the expertise of other outside parties, the founder's expertise as well. But a bit of trust. And I mean, if you have these people that come in multiple times and each time they've failed, it's like, well, I'm not going to throw my trust in with you.
Yeah, it depends on why they've failed. So I'd rather invest in someone who's failed and understood why they failed versus a first-time founder who's not experienced that, who's not prepared for that. But a bit about that trust is it's about knowing they're making good decisions. It's about a longer relationship rather than meeting someone and writing a check 2 weeks later. It's about one of the longer deals, Katia Health, which we invested into a medical device. We were talking to the CEO for, I think, 15 months prior to investment. I knew of them for known about them for 15 years. It's a long process, and you're really, as you go through diligence, you're really asking yourself, do I believe this? But also, do I feel like I'm being misled? And so, if you get a few sort of issues, okay. But if you start getting a pattern on that, then you have to walk away.
Right. And only with that time horizon do you really see that in true clarity, right? The FTX thing, everyone was jumping on top of each other, trying to push in front of the queue to get the money in. Again, everyone was flush with cash post-pandemic, stimulus, all that money flowing in. So this probably does lead into it as well, having that additional time horizon.
You can't have that fear of missing out. And so another deal we worked on for, I think, over 6 months. We loved the technology. In the end, we asked the founder a question, and they couldn't answer it, but worse, got angry at us for asking the question. And despite everything else, we had to walk away. And so what's really important in diligence is you need to be prepared to walk away after doing the work. If you're not, then there's no point doing the diligence.
Yeah, the sunk cost fallacy, right?
You can't do that in this space.
Oh, we've spent so much time on this. We've put so much hundreds of thousands of dollars into the due diligence or whatever. No.
Yeah.
Chalk up your losses before they inflate to something more dramatic.
Exactly it.
Yeah. Awesome. So why don't we talk about the kind of the maths behind, or the math behind a fund? So you mentioned about the risk tolerance, the long time horizons that venture capitals are more attuned for. They've got the expertise, the skills to get in early, particularly if they're interested in deep tech. But I imagine that you're looking for the unicorn amongst the horses, right? There's going to be maybe out of 10, not all of them are going to succeed, and that's kind of built into the maths, right?
That's it. And maybe we're focused on the negative just in the previous conversation. Let's focus on the positive. The positive is that 1 out of 10 companies we invest into is going to make it really big, and it's our job to find them. But it is a bit of a looking for a needle in a haystack type of exercise. We need to narrow that haystack down to maybe a small bundle, a small amount of hay, and then we need to invest into them, find who's successful, and then back them even further. So the general sort of numbers, depending on when you invest, is maybe 3 out of 10 will generate a nice return, but out of those 3, 1 of them will be a large return. And maybe sort of 1 in 20 will be multi-billion dollars, and it's our job to find it, and when we find it, to really double down.
Yeah, oh, that's incredible. Of course, it needs to be worth it, right? But you've built in. So you kind of mentioned 3 are going to be successful, 1 is going to be uber successful, maybe 1 in 20 is going to be ultra successful. What's the time horizon we're talking for this? Because it's not couple of years, is it?
No. Most venture capital funds are 10-year closed-ended funds. So generally they're looking for 5-year returns in 5 years. And at the start of your fund, you can take a slightly longer horizon. Towards the end of the deployment of your fund, you have to take a shorter horizon. Yep. The reality is medical takes a long time. We all know that. And so you've really got to be careful about how you balance the portfolio. You can't have all your companies be really risky and take 10 years, but you might accept one of them that's out of your portfolio to take that full 10-year horizon.
Right. Okay. So like the different tranches of risk and time horizon for those companies. Yeah. Oh, that's very cool. Now, where was I going to go with that? That was a follow-on. When you're establishing a fund, so it's not the venture capital firm's money per se, right? So you're bringing in outside funds from investors that have additional capital to deploy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was actually talking to a founder just yesterday, and it came up. And it occurred to them. I said, "Wait a second. You guys need a pitch to investors just like we do." And the answer is yes. And so we actually live in the same world as our portfolio companies. We're constantly evaluated by our investors. We need to raise money. We need to show returns. And I think that's actually so. We have to be really disciplined about how we invest because it is other people's money. But it also puts us in the same equal playing field as our portfolio companies. We, their victories are our victories. Their pain is our pain, and that's really important. You have that alignment.
Yeah, true. I didn't think about it like that. Which direction is the relationship going? I mean, do you have to find the companies first and then pitch a fund, or do you pitch a fund based on previous experience, knowing that you have 50 companies out of which you'll select 20?
Yeah, so it's really hard to start at the first fund. Is the first thing. So you can't just sort of get out of bed one morning having not been in venture capital and say I'm going to start a fund. Most people have got a lot of experience, and generally you've made a few investments, maybe as an angel, but hopefully in another organisation. And yes, you've got sort of relationships with deal flow. You've got a few deals that you think that are on. You've got actually a fund thesis. So just like a company will have a vision, for a fund, you've actually have a thesis, investment strategy. And then you've got a few companies you've selected that are consistent with that strategy, and that's what you take to investors in the fund. And then as you have multiple funds, then you're selling that plus also your track record. And hopefully your track record is a positive.
But it would take a while to build up that track record, wouldn't it? I mean, you've got to be so patient.
You do. So it's very hard for, I think, it's equally as hard for second-time fund managers because they've got a fund, but they have got no performance to show. We're lucky in that our first fund, we did that actually as an open-ended fund over a 10-year period. And so when we were raising our second fund, we had exits to point to.
Okay, yeah. And that's what everyone's really gunning for, right? That's when you get the return.
Yeah, and exits doesn't mean that we sell the company to someone else. And sometimes it means we sell our shareholding to other investors that want to come in and take a company to the next stage. Our experience is to take a company to a certain stage, and when the next round of investor wants to come in, they might want to have a bigger piece of the pie. They might want to put more capital in and take it on, and that's okay.
So I suppose the steps are raising the capital, finding ventures to put money in, scaling those ventures, and then eventually, what we just, like you just said, is the big exit, or handing over the reins to someone else.
Yeah. And I think everyone focuses on venture capital as sort of the big thing is selecting the investments. That's really where the journey starts. The bigger thing is guiding those companies, and in deep tech, because it's so complicated. You've been through pharmaceutical development yourself. There's so many tricks of the trade, insights that you need to know, and the more people you get around the table, the better robust decision making you have. And because founders, not necessarily are repeat founders, or second time founders, they haven't been through that. So it's really our job to help guide that. We do have, we have one company where it's a third time founder, and they've been successful twice before. But it still doesn't mean that they don't want our advice. In fact, they love it because they need someone to bounce the ideas off who actually has skin in the game almost as much as them.
Yes. Yeah, that's interesting because you kind of, basically I'm just rehashing what you said, but you think venture capital is throwing money and away you go. But would you argue that you did say that's the first step, but that's probably 50% of it or maybe less than, right? It's not just the money, it's the networking, it's the expertise, it's the experience, it's the knowledge sharing. So that's typically done in the board seat arrangements that you come up with when you invest?
Yeah, often in board seats. Other times we just connect with our companies once a week, once a fortnight, ask them what they need. It just really depends on another concept, whether we're leading or whether we're following.
Right.
So, generally, so in a deal, there's normally one lead investor and a number of other investors. And it's our view that the lead investor should be someone that really understands the market and ideally the technology. The first thing is to understand that problem and market, and they will then put the deal terms together and do the diligence, and others will follow. That lead investor should also be able to add value. So where we have got all those sort of things together and it fits our investment thesis and strategy, then we'll lead. If it's one we don't know as much about the industry or the technology, but we can't add as much value, but we think we can be additive, then we'll look at following. If we can't add any value, then there's no way we can invest.
Got it. Yeah. What are some? So you are a partner at Pacific Channel. Is that the right title?
Yes.
Yeah, partner. And that means that you, in some of these portfolio companies that you are on the board of, or you have a directorship in some of that. So you've got your fingers in a lot of pies, I can imagine.
Yeah, I've got a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
Well,
your LinkedIn profile is quite incredible, you know.
Yeah, and just for one of our companies, we just had a day and a half strategy session. In fact, that's what I've just come from, and those are really great because you've been along the journey with the company, and it really gives founders and management someone to bounce ideas off. So that directorship role is really important, and so we call it active investment. That's the title, right?
Yeah, no, so good. And you having done this with so many different companies, you would have seen a lot happening, and you would have seen some patterns, or maybe there's some outliers, and you can kind of see how the vision can be implemented before maybe some of the founders can, because you've got that step-by-step exposure, right?
Yeah, I mean, and my job is not to be the smartest person in the room. It's the person to ask the right questions, right? Yeah. And it's management's job to really solve those problems. And yes, I'm there to help, but I'm not there driving it forward as management. We really got to. My job is to enable management.
Yeah. What have been some of, maybe you can't share too much detail, and that's fine, but what are some of the really big successes that you've had in your various roles in these portfolio companies, making some really important decisions or connecting founders with other companies?
Yeah, I'll probably easier to talk to the ones where I was actually management. So that's a really important part of my story is I think for deep tech is, because deep tech is so complicated, you actually need people who've been there in management shoes before to actually provide that advice. You can't provide theoretical advice. It needs to be...
Oh, I watched a YouTube video. Yeah, we can do this.
Yeah, exactly. And it's always very sector-specific expertise. And so I think the biggest success I've had personally is taking Engender Technologies, which I was COO, Chief Operating Officer of, to exit. So I got involved, helped raise a Series A, helps scale the technology to the point where we could raise a larger amount of money, and then through that process was able to communicate that value to three corporates that ended up resulting in a competitive bidding process, and we sold the company. And actually that company was retained in New Zealand with its R&D team, which they actually invested a lot more into and beefed up. Yeah. So it was a success for the investors and success for the individuals running the founders of the co-founders and founders of that company, and the employees as well.
And Engender, is that the gamete selection
technology?
Yes,
sperm sex selection technology. Right. Yeah. So sorting, very New Zealand, sorting bovines sperm cells by sex, because dairy farmers want cows, but bulls don't produce any milk. Yep. So there's not much value to them. And so we were developing it as an agricultural technology, but we always knew in the distance there was a potential for use for cell sorting for clinical or cancer type treatments, and so it was really exciting technology. But we managed to sell it with that first application.
I see. Is that going on further development in these avenues that you mentioned?
No, the acquirer is an agricultural company, so they really focused on their bread and butter. But it was very exciting to be involved with technology that has an amazing vision that you can develop over.
Absolutely. And only with those, I kind of probably sound like a broken record to anyone who's listened to more than one episode of this, but we really need more high-value industries in New Zealand in order to maintain the status quo as being a developed nation. I mean, not to put my tinfoil hat on, but the world is changing. Globalization is retreating a little bit, and with that will come other certain challenges. And we can't rely on the connectivity with the rest of the world and ease of access to different goods and services like we have had for the last 50, 70 years or whatever. So, farming and tourism, great, love it for the economy, really, really is the underpinning of our economy, but we need more high-value industries and sectors within those industries to really export to the world, to maintain our place in the developed world.
Yeah, I don't think I can say it any better than that.
No, thanks. Yeah. I mean, that's why we need more of everything, don't we? We need more venture capital, we need more education, we need more retention of people in New Zealand, we need more human capital. Yeah. Gosh, where do we begin?
And if you look at New Zealand, actually, the large pharmaceutical company GlaxoSmithKline, most New Zealanders don't realise Glaxo was a New Zealand company.
Are you kidding me? I had no idea.
Yeah, it started in, it was some bovine product for some type of supplementation. Some good science behind it. That was, I think, 80-something years ago, maybe even longer, and ended up moving to the UK, and then ended up as part of this big conglomerate. Long story. Not been a New Zealand company for a long time,
right.
but origins in New Zealand, founded in New Zealand. Yeah. And then we look at Fisher and Paykel Healthcare, most valuable New Zealand company on our stock exchange. So we can make it happen, and so there is that expertise in medical in New Zealand. And so how do we then actually make the conscious decision to leverage it? And actually, we need to invest in it. And we're part of the solution. There are other parts that we need, which we can talk about if you want.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's really the investor's job is when the science is completed to really invest in the development of those of technologies. So we're not there to provide basic research grants. Our job is to take proven science and turn it into a product, and then scale that business through selling that product. In the places like US, the NIH provides big grants to bridge that science to get it to that level. In New Zealand, we do have some grants. There is a grant program by MB which can provide $12 million. That's how Katia Health came about, got to that point. But by and large, it's very hard to get those grants. And so investors in New Zealand often end up bridging science, which means we invest too early, which is creates a bit more risk. And so and also we want to attract more people to these companies, and the more value there is in a company, the more you can attract people. So what we need is more grants to get that last bit of science done to get it to that point.
Get it just over the line.
And I'm sure that people will argue we need more early stage science funding, and yes, I'm sure that will be additive to the pool. But there's no point going 90%. My point is there's no point going 90% of the way and not doing the last 10%.
Okay. Yeah.
And once we get those companies, then we need to have the right people. And we do need to, if we can have more investors investing into these deals, put more money in, we can really attract the right people. With only $1 million in a company, you're not really going to be able to do that. With $6 million into this company, Katia Health, we're really able to have the right people involved.
Yeah. I mean, I was talking to some other founders on recent episodes, and they talked about how things are changing. I mean, the last 10 years, there's been quite a lot of increased investment and success. Maybe not less increased investment, but there has been more success of companies which send a really strong signal that you can do this from New Zealand. I mean, there's a few household names out there. Elementary is one. They're on the verge of full commercial production. And there's a lot of activity happening out of like the ABI, Auckland Bioengineering Institute, which is really exciting. But there's almost like, we need to capitalize on that to keep it going.
Correct. So we can't let the money stop even temporarily. So we do need additional, more venture capital and more funds in those venture capital funds. But I think to your point is every success we have, or even unfortunately failures, we're building expertise and capability in the ecosystem, which means the next company can go further. It was a crazy idea that New Zealand could start a medical device company that would be selling globally, with its own sales team. But actually, I saw Brian Ward at Aroa Bio do that within his own company over his journey. His first product he licensed out to a distributor, second product again, and then he actually then bought back his distribution rights once he'd got enough scale, and now distributed himself. And the company distributes itself, and now any of its future products, it's doing its own distribution. So, 20 years ago, we would have thought develop a bit of technology and then flick it off.
Yeah.
So every success means we can take it even further to the point that hopefully we'll have multiple fish and pāko healthcares and Aroa biosurgeries, and maybe a Limitry hopefully will be one of those as well.
I did hear someone name them the next Fisher and Paykel Healthcare, which is high praise because Fisher, like you mentioned, it's the most valued company on our stock exchange. I think it's 15 billion or something thereabouts.
Well, I like whoever said that, because Aroa Biosurgery is the company I first worked for, and I convinced my family to invest into, and I still own all my stock that I bought. So I'm still patient.
Yeah,
I'm
very good. Very good. Yeah, you're living and breathing what you say. I think another one of my guests mentioned that they think that New Zealand can be like the Silicon Valley of the medical device, medtech, and biotech world in the Asia Pacific, which I think is very exciting if someone who's active in the industry thinks it can be that. But obviously, what you've alluded to, there needs to be, maintain the status quo, up the ante of the status quo, get more investment into that final last 10%, as you mentioned, to get that early science over the line so it does become a bit more amenable to venture capital investment.
I think that's right. I mean, so one thing we always look at when we invest is where is New Zealand's competitive advantage to develop this company? And so if you look at agriculture, clearly in dairy, we've got lots of expertise, which is why Ingenia Technologies made sense from New Zealand. In medical, we have forever we had the great medical regulations, which means ease of doing clinical studies. It's actually been relatively cost effective to do those studies. Australia has some of those same advantages. They've also got great tax credits and incentivization of R&D. And so I think New Zealand has the potential, but we just need to have the right structures in place, from the early science to the venture capital money to the government support and government regulation or not over-regulation to enable that. And so it's no point having 9 things but not doing the 10th. You need all those pieces in play.
Yeah, right. It's almost like without all 10 pillars, it's the Colosseum's going to fall down.
Exactly.
If you could wave a magic wand, and I mean, this is a pretty silly thing to ask off the back of talking about all 10 things need to be in place, but if you could magic wand and change something systemically within New Zealand that would have the biggest impact in terms of commercialization of novel medical or biological technologies, what would it be?
Oh gosh, that's I don't even know if I can answer that one. Maybe I think out loud.
Go on.
Definitely, more early stage funding, but that funding, venture capital getting involved earlier. So one of the successes we've had as a fund is actually engaging with academics early when they're writing those grants to help them with the problem statement to ensure that that research is solving a problem. So I'm not saying Marsden or basic research grant should have that. That's not right. That's blue sky research. But when they're applying to MB for a grant, we're helping with those problem statements. So more money for those grants, but more investors having more funds so they can actually spend more time at that early stage to shape that up. Because what you don't want to do is have someone receive, say, $3 million in grants, but then spend it not the exact right way so it doesn't result in the right outcome.
Yeah, interesting.
But if we had bigger funds, we could justify that, and then when it's ready, then we could invest into it, and then build the teams around that.
So it's like you're priming the pipeline.
Exactly.
All the way at that grant stage.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, that would be awesome, right?
So
have a bit more of a commercial nous amongst the people that are writing those grants.
Yeah, and so there's a company we're in the process of spinning out that's in the skin cancer diagnostic space. I I think I helped the academics write the initial grant 5 years ago. These things are a long haul. So 5 years, and now the science is done. It's ready to be spun out. So we couldn't have invested 5 years ago, but we can certainly help in that way. And they've got the clinical data, they've got the system working, and now we need to miniaturize it, productize it. And so we're investing in the development. But we wouldn't have had that opportunity if we didn't talk to them early, and if we didn't have the funding as an institution to commit people to doing that exercise. That couldn't have happened either.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, this is we're going to have to leave it there, but this has been a fantastic discussion. I'm super excited for the future of the industry with people like yourself and all the other guests on this podcast. Everyone's really passionate about building up the ecosystem in New Zealand, which is cool, whether it be medical science or clinical research or commercialization in general. I really look forward to seeing what you get up to and additional roles being thrown on that LinkedIn profile, which I'm sure there will be. If people want to learn a bit more about yourself or Pacific Channel, where can they go?
Go to our website, pacificchannel.com. Reach out to us. There's plenty of ways. And if you want to have a chat or a coffee, always up for that.
Awesome.